You're tuned into the Spot Up Pod, the official podcast of the Spot Up Shot newsletter. I'm your host, Paul Garcia. In today's episode, a coaching change. Coach Pop becomes El Jefe, and Mitch Johnson becomes the Spurs' new head coach. Stephon Castle has won the Rookie of the Year award. Another offseason trade question to ponder, and the upcoming NBA draft lottery on Monday. How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Spot Up Pod. First, it's been about 2 weeks since I last recorded an episode, so I want to begin by going through the latest news for the San Antonio Spurs, and that was a coaching change that took place last week. So let's go ahead and jump into that coaching change. So on Friday last week, the Spurs did announce that Coach Pop would be transitioning from head coach to president of basketball operations, and then not long after that announcement, the team announced that Mitch Johnson had been hired as the new head coach. Before we jump into how the press conference went on Monday, where we actually got to hear from Coach Pop for the first time, I do want to talk about just some obviously, you know, if you've been watching Spurs basketball for the years, you know that Coach Pop's a legendary coach. He's already in the Hall of Fame, and I just want to highlight some of his career marks here. We do know that Pop is the all-time winning head coach in NBA basketball in regular season wins with 1,422 wins. He coached the Spurs for 29 years as head coach. He also won 5 titles during that time in 1999, in 2003, in 2005, 2007, and then 2014. And then, of course, he recently his last big victory was the Tokyo Olympics, the 2020 Olympics. He helped Team USA get the gold medal. So again, Coach Pop had a legendary career being the head coach of the Spurs. Now he's moving on to the front office to be the president of basketball operations. And so that leads us to Monday's press conference, and I do want to talk about that here a little bit more in detail because, like I said, it was the first time we did hear from Coach Pop. So on Monday, the Spurs, had sent out to the media that there was going to be a press conference, but we did not know that Coach Pop was actually going to speak at this press conference. So they had just basically said they were going to announce that, Mitch Johnson was going to be they're going to formally introduce Mitch Johnson as the new head coach. But Pop did make a surprise appearance there at that press conference, and he opened it by giving about a 7-minute speech. He was flanked on his sides by Tim Duncan and Manu Ginobili by his sides. There was also a lot of former players in attendance for the Spurs, both and then also a lot of current players there as well. And so it was good just to hear Pop speak for the first time since he did suffer that stroke back on November 2nd. And so basically, he thanked everyone, for their support over his time in his recovery in the last couple of months. From the rehab specialists that have been helping him out, just the fans, just everyone sending thoughts and prayers. And not only just for that time period, but also for his 25. He said 25 or 30 years there as the Spurs' head coach. But I want to go through first some quotes that really stood out to me from Coach Pop here. And, some of these are also about Mitch Johnson and why, in Pop's opinion, that Mitch Johnson ended up getting this job as the new head coach for the Spurs, with Pop, going to the front office to become the president of basketball operations. So here's some quotes that stood out. So first of all, again, this is our first time hearing Pop in his own words talking about his recovery and why he decided to, step down from coaching and just move into the front office. So here's what he said, and this is from his quotes. Things are getting better by the day, but it's not good enough for what we plan ahead, and so it's time to make this change. So again, as I had discussed 2 weeks ago, going into some of the big offseason questions for the Spurs, that was one of the big offseason questions was, what was going to happen with the coaching situation? Was Pop going to return? Was he going to decide to move to not become the head, to not stay as the head coach anymore? And so obviously, 2 weeks had passed, and so we did finally get that answer, and that's Pop saying that health wise he wasn't ready yet to be the head coach, or he couldn't quite get back to that level just now. And so the Spurs do have big plans, and so that's why he decided to step away from coaching and move on to the front office role, as their Pop there in his own words. Here was a quote from Pop, basically saying how Mitch Johnson's going to carry that foundation of what he Pop and his former Spurs players, from people in the front office like R.C. Buford have kind of built over the years. Brian Wright, the current GM, he said this. He said, "That's one of the reasons why Mitch Johnson will be taking over, because we have total faith in him to continue what's been started a long time ago." So again, Pop just there talking about how Mitch Johnson's going to carry forward basically like that corporate knowledge that the Spurs have built in over the years, that culture that they've built in their locker room, with the city, with the fans, what fans expect from the Spurs organization. So there's Pop saying that Mitch Johnson's going to continue to bring that guidance forward for the team. Despite, Pop still, he's still not quite at 100% from what he was before the stroke, but he was still able to, be Pop himself. He was still able to throw some jokes in there, to make it, just how he is. So at one point he was like, thanking everyone who's been helping him in his recovery. And he mentioned how Tim Duncan and Manu Ginobili have been there by his side, in all of his workouts during his rehab process. And then he basically said something along the lines of like, Timmy and Manu are telling the trainers like new methods of how to, make him, make it just, I don't know, more difficult for him or whatever. And so basically he says that, that they're getting payback for all the years, I guess, is when he was coaching them and putting them through some tough drills. And then you can even see Duncan kind of like looks at the floor and he's just like laughing and giggling. So again, and you can hear the whole room just laughing. So that was Pop too, even in a very serious moment when he, he's making his first appearance from a stroke that he sustained. Again, he's not back to 100% where he was before, but still he's able to make those jokes still and get everybody laughing. One of the things that we're used to what he was able to do in a lot of his press conferences. So there was Pop though, still making some of his jokes. And then here was a big quote from Pop, again, about Mitch Johnson. And this is kind of answering that question of, why was Mitch put into this place? And also the fact that the Spurs got to kind of see a test of Mitch Johnson this past season because, he got thrown into an unfortunate situation where Pop had the stroke and then Mitch Johnson had to become the acting head coach from November 2nd onward to the end of the season. So here was his quote. He says, "One of the reasons that I'm doing this now is that we have to have someone in charge who's fully capable of giving their very best, because that's what this group deserves and demands. And we have that man here in San Antonio. Mitch has been in the G League for a few years, behind the bench for a few years, and then he took over this year and did a fantastic job with circumstances that were very difficult. And we saw him in action, and he was brilliant. Players respect him. He'll hold them accountable, and I couldn't be more thrilled for him and his family and friends." So again, that was Pop basically saying that, again, this Spurs team that, they have Wemby as their future. They have a lot of bright hopes, of a future going forward with De'Aaron Fox they traded for. They have the rookie of the year Stephon Castle. So there's a lot of big expectations for this team now going forward. And like he said, there needs to be someone in there who's going to give their, who can give their full, is able to give their full right now. And he says, he wasn't able to do that right now just because of his health situation. So the Spurs have seen enough from Mitch Johnson. The fact that he got that early test, a test that unfortunately no one saw coming. But from what the Spurs saw, they really like what they saw from Mitch Johnson in these last few months of this past season, where Johnson was the acting head coach. And so that's where Pop says that. He's basically been a part of the Spurs organization for about 9 or 10 years, Mitch Johnson, working his way from Austin all the way to San Antonio's bench, alongside Coach Pop as an assistant coach. And now they've seen enough where they feel very confident in giving him, Mitch Johnson, this job as the new head coach for the Spurs. So after his speech, Coach Pop, again, like about 7-8 minutes that he spoke, then he did something else. That was just very, very much something unique that only Pop would do. So what he did was he had like this like windbreaker kind of jacket, a Spurs jacket on in the press release, and then he starts unzipping it, and underneath it there's a shirt that says El Jefe on it. And so then he reveals it. He turns around. Tim and Manu kind of help him out, and on the back it says President of Basketball Operations. And so here's what he says. He goes, "I'll have a new job, and I want everybody to understand what that new job is. I'm no longer coach. I'm El Jefe." So again, that was Pop. Everybody, started laughing and saw the shirt that he made, and there's Pop basically saying, in a very joking way, but still like serious way that this is I'm not the coach anymore. This is now Mitch Johnson's now the coach, but I'm still going to be part of this organization. And being El Jefe, that basically the president, basketball operations is going to be there to help helping run the organization. He also said that he's going to do his best to help Coach Johnson as well, and also the players. So Pop will still be involved there as well, as what it looks like based on his words there in that press conference. So after Pop sat down, then Mitch Johnson and Brian Wright, the Spurs' GM, both went up to the podium, and they started to. Mitch Johnson basically had a speech that he wanted to say, and just thanked a lot of people within the organization, his family, for the sacrifices they have made, people that have had a big impact on his career. And then from there, he took some questions from the media as well. So one of the quotes I want to talk about from Mitch Johnson was one of the quotes he had to his current players, which are the players under contract expected to be back next season. He said this: To the current players, you are the part of this opportunity that is most exciting. You guys have put yourselves in a place to continue to grow, to do something special. I cannot wait to continue to grow with you, partner with you, challenge you, and try to get better every single day. And my only guarantee is that I will give you everything I have to do that. So again, that was one of Mitch Johnson's messages to his current players that are expected to be under contract next season. And some players I saw there in the crowd were Harrison Barnes was there. I saw Stephon Castle, just to name a few players from the current team that should be back on the roster going into next season. Brian Wright was basically asked by one of the media members, why did the Spurs feel confident in giving Mitch Johnson this job? And here was one of Wright's quotes that really stuck out to me. He said, "These positions are hard, head coach. In the seat that I sit in as GM, you want a leader that's authentic and genuine to themselves. You want a teacher that can help bring a group forward, and you want a partner." So again, that was Brian Wright, the Spurs GM, saying that, he and Mitch Johnson kind of started within the Spurs organization almost like around the same time period, about 9-10 years ago. And they've kind of, and just as Brian Wright's kind of worked his way up in the organization to becoming the general manager, so has Mitch Johnson worked his way up from in the coaching realm to becoming the head coach from Austin to then moving up to San Antonio. And so that's where Brian says that he's seen that journey that Mitch has taken, and he's seen the growth in him. And then obviously, the other Spurs members of the front office have seen that as well, and that's why they were confident in giving Mitch Johnson this job again. Like he said, not just as a partner, but also like as a teacher for the players. And then finally, to end this segment here, Mitch Johnson had a really good quote about Coach Pop. He was basically asked about, one of the key lessons he's learned from Pop. And I think that what Mitch says here really takes part of, just what we've seen from Pop over the years, things that, former players have said about him, current players, other coaches, other players have said about him, in the NBA over the years. And so here's what Mitch said here. And again, it just exemplifies who Pop has been as a head coach. He said, how important people and relationships are. He understands people and relationships and the significance of every moment and every touch point with every person. And I can't be him or El Jefe, but to be able to commit and invest in people and relationships. And that can be having to yell and hold someone accountable. And that can be to put your arm around someone's shoulder and love them. And he did it better than anybody that's ever walked the sidelines. And I will attempt to do it my way, whatever that looks like, moving forward. So again, that was a really good quote there, I think, by Mitch Johnson, just kind of exemplifying what we saw over the years from Pop as a teacher, as a coach there, where yes, he can be very, he can be very stern with the players. Sometimes we saw back when the Spurs winning championships, there was nights where maybe the starting lineup didn't have it. So he's taking Tony Parker out of a game. He's taking Tim Duncan out and putting in a whole bench unit. But then there's also those moments, where he shows that he's a very caring person. And you definitely see that with the fact that Tim and Manu, being there, yes, they're retired. They've been out of the league now for a few years, but they're still there with Coach Pop. They're helping him in his rehab. Also, they're always around the younger players. They like to just be around the culture there that the Spurs have built. And so they're always kind of making their way back, and former players kind of visit still in San Antonio. And so again, that's just one of those quotes that really stuck out to me from Mitch Johnson, really exemplifying who Pop was as a coach, where yes, he can be very, very stern, very, very tough, but also he's very caring for the players. He really gets to know them, gets to know their families, and their personal lives as well. So again, that was a really good quote there that I wanted to mention there from Mitch Johnson. And now, basically, yes, like coming into this next season, I know that when Mitch Johnson took over for Coach Pop on November 2nd, the Spurs ended up going 32-45 the rest of the way, as with Mitch Johnson as the acting head coach. However, those wins and losses still go on Pop's record. So when next season begins in October, Mitch Johnson will have a clean slate. He's going to have a 0-0 record to begin. And so he's going to start building his head coaching experience here because those wins and losses that he had this season, they still go on Pop's overall record. So again, this is it. The Spurs are now moving on to a new head coach starting in October when the first regular season game begins with Mitch Johnson at the helm. And of course, we're still going to, Coach Pop is still going to be part of the organization there as the president of basketball operations, or as he likes to call himself now, El Jefe. All right, so since I've been out, over the last 2 weeks, one of the news items that came out was that it wasn't too surprising. As I've mentioned here on the Spot Up Pod, and I've written about before on the spotupshot.com, Stephon Castle was the favorite, according to Vegas, to win the Rookie of the Year award. Well, on April 29th, the NBA did announce the Rookie of the Year award winner, and sure enough, it was Stephon Castle. And so the Spurs have now back-to-back winners in the Rookie of the Year award by Wemby winning last year, now Castle winning this year, and Castle becomes the fourth Rookie of the Year winner for the Spurs, joining Wemby, Tim Duncan, and David Robinson. When the votes were shown by the NBA or displayed by the NBA, it was basically Castle won, overwhelmingly. He wasn't unanimous, but he was still an overwhelming winner there, where he got 92 first place votes. Zachary Risache, the number one pick last year for the Atlanta Hawks, he only got 5 first place votes, and then Jalen Wells of the Memphis Grizzlies got 3 first place votes. So again, Castle, ran away with that award. It wasn't really close at all. And over on the spotupshot.com, I did write about Castle winning the award, and I wrote about some of his season highs. If you want to go visit that over on the spotupshot.com. Let's keep going. All right, so in the last episode of the Spot Up Pod, I went through a bunch of off-season questions, that the Spurs are going to face this coming off-season, and in there, I talked about the kind of 2 routes they could look at building the roster for this coming season in 25-26, and so I said that they could go the more like safe approach of basically like using their draft picks to fill roster needs on the roster, or using like the non-tax mid-level exception, or making some trades where they're not doing any kind of blockbuster deals. But then I did talk about how yes, they could, because they have the future picks, they have some movable contracts. They could get in those blockbuster deals. When I mentioned there was the example of Kevin Durant. Well, another player's name is now going to start getting into trade rumblings, most likely, and that's going to be Giannis Antetokounmpo, because let me just talk about why Giannis's name is going to be mentioned in trade rumors. He could be mentioned in trade rumors this offseason, and then why the Spurs, whether there's been no reporting that they're interested in him right now, but again, they could end up getting linked to him, and I'll explain why here as well. So here's some of the reasons why you might see Giannis's name in trade rumors this summer. 1, the Milwaukee Bucks were eliminated in the first round of the Eastern Conference playoffs by the Indiana Pacers in just 5 games. We know that, Dame Lillard was coming back from the blood clot issue. He comes back and then he gets hurt, and he suffers a torn ACL. They're in the series, so he's out. So again, they lose in 5 games, the Bucks. Number 2 is Dame's situation, his health situation. 1, he's 34 years old right now. He's going to turn 35 in the summer. Again, he has a torn ACL at that age. And RotoWire.com has his estimated return date as March 1st, 2026. So he's basically missing almost all of next season. If he's lucky enough to make it back for next season, it'll be right before the playoffs start. So basically, Giannis and the Bucks are having to go into the season without their second best player, Dame, not being able to be there because of the injury situation. And Dame's deal, contract wise, is that he's hurt, so it would be hard to trade if they were trying to trade him, because he's going to be out basically most of next season. He's also, like I said, 35, turning this summer, and then he still has 2 years left on his deal at the max. The second year is a player option. So again, that's another reason. That's the second reason why the Bucks, there could be some Giannis trade rumblings. The third reason is that the Bucks are kind of limited with their future picks situation, so they don't even have their own first round pick in this coming draft in 2025 in June, in about a month, and then also in 2026 the New Orleans Pelicans can swap with Milwaukee. There's a pick swap there, so the Pelicans get to choose. Do they want their own pick, New Orleans' pick, or do they want the Bucks' pick? Whichever one's better, New Orleans is going to take that pick. Financially, the Bucks do have a little bit more flexibility than they did before the trade deadline. So because they moved Chris Middleton for Kyle Kuzma, it gave them a little bit of leeway getting under the second apron, both for this season and then also going into the summer. And so, reading Bobby Marks of ESPN, one of the things he does is he does these offseason articles where he kind of just gives a good picture of where everybody's at going into the offseason. And so Bobby's main takeaways were that, yes, there's a little bit more financial flexibility for the Bucks. They're not like the Suns, who are like in that second apron where they have very few limited moves. So basically, Bobby says that, they can still re-sign some of their own free agents. They have like Brook Lopez coming up. Bobby Portis has a player option he can opt out of. Gary Trent Jr. who had a good playoffs, also is a free agent who was only on the minimum. So it's kind of tough for Milwaukee to re-sign him with his bird rights. They would have to use their non-tax MLE of like $14 million. They can participate in some trades. It makes it a little bit easier. But the tough part is that for Milwaukee is that, according to Bobby Marks, is that they can't move their big salaries, players like Dame or Kyle Kuzma, because they can't move multiple first round picks. The earliest they can trade a pick is 2031 or 2032, but they can't tie 2 or 3 picks together. And again, if you're trying to move Kuzma's contract, who he didn't have a good season with Milwaukee past February, or Dame because of his injury situation, plus he's going to be 35. Again, it's hard to move those contracts unless you're attaching a pick to them, and it's it's hard to do that when you can't attach multiple picks. So again, that's where they're in a little bit of a tougher situation to kind of still build a championship core around Giannis with the limited moves they can make financially and with their pick situation. Now, I want to be clear. Giannis has not asked for a trade. That's one of the big things we got to keep in mind here is that yes, the rumblings are going to start coming out. Us as media, we see this. It looks like Milwaukee doesn't really have a bright future for Giannis where they could put a championship contender. So that's why we started looking at possible trades and those kind of things. But we do want to be clear though. For now, Giannis has not asked out of Milwaukee. So again, this is all right now just like early speculation, just because of the situation, like I outlined, that the Bucks are in. And typically when a top three player right now, an MVP candidate, is in this situation, and it looks kind of bleak right now to try to get back into the title race. It looks like Milwaukee's very far, so that's why it wouldn't be surprising if Giannis did end up asking for a trade out of Milwaukee this summer. Now, why is the Spurs' name mentioned here in a possible if Giannis asks out? It's because of where the Spurs are kind of like Houston, kind of like OKC, where they have a lot of young players. Then they also have a lot of picks. So again, if there was ever a moment that a player like Giannis is available on the trade market where he asks out and Milwaukee's looking for the best deal, then that's where the Spurs' name could come up, just because again there's a chance to get an MVP candidate player, caliber player here in Giannis, if he were to ask out for the trades, ask out of Milwaukee. But also, so that's why teams like San Antonio, teams like Houston, who have a lot of draft capital, who have a lot of young prospects, young players on their teams, that's why those teams' names start getting linked right away to Giannis in the event that he does ask out. Just looking at Giannis's contract situation. He's making $48.7 million this season. So again, if there was a deal done between now and June 30th, that's the salary you're working with, is $48.7 million. Next season, after July 1st, he's going to make $54.1 million as a max player. And then the following season, 26-27, he's making $58.4 million. And then in 27-28, that summer, he has a player option for $62.7 million. And he will, between now and 26-27, he's going to be age 30 to about 33 during those 3 years. So if you trade for Giannis, you have him under contract for about two more seasons here, from age like 30 to 33. Now, I'm not going to get super detailed into trade scenarios here. What I really want to do is just look at more open-ended questions again, just like I did in the last episode. Now, instead of Kevin Durant talking about Giannis possible trades. So like one of the big questions for the Spurs is, if Giannis wanted out and the Spurs were going to start calling Milwaukee, obviously the Bucks want, of course, the picks. They're going to want the draft capital. So the Spurs have that part. Again, we don't know how many picks, how many swaps they want, etc. But who are the young prospects that the Bucks want, the young players, and so that obviously is Stephon Castle, because obviously we know that the Spurs wouldn't include Wemby in those trade discussions, but that's where it gets interesting is after winning the Rookie of the Year, are the Spurs ready to if Milwaukee wants Castle in a trade and that's the deal breaker, are the Spurs okay with moving him? So that's one of the key questions. Giannis is a top 3 MVP candidate this year. So again, I would say obviously for me, I would say yes, but obviously that's a different scenario for the Spurs. We saw that they had a big presentation for Castle when he got his Rookie of the Year award, where David Robinson, Wemby, and Tim Duncan were all there on stage with him in a little celebration for him getting his Rookie of the Year. So again, that's one of the big questions early on is the Bucks are going to want the Spurs' best young player outside of Wemby, because the Spurs will not trade Wemby, and so that's where Castle, are the Spurs ready? Would they be willing to move him? Also, one of the key questions is from Milwaukee's side, how do they view Castle? Obviously, the Spurs view Castle very, very high, and so do a lot of teams in the league. But are the Bucks, maybe they view someone from like Houston, if they get involved in trade negotiations, maybe they get if OKC doesn't do well in these playoffs, maybe they like a player on OKC's team. Those kind of teams that have the draft capital plus the young players, maybe Milwaukee likes somebody else on those teams as well. Over Castle, that's something else to look at. And then, like I said, there's going to be negotiations if word gets out that Giannis wants out, because then it's the opposite of the Lakers situation with Luka, where the Lakers and Mavs were kind of just talking quietly. They didn't let it get out, because obviously if it got out that Luka was available, a bunch of teams would have jumped in with better offers than what the Mavs got. And so obviously if Giannis says he wants out, then of course that's going to trickle down to all the front offices. They're going to get word, and so they're going to start sending the best packages to Milwaukee, and then Milwaukee can start, figuring out, raising the price level of what teams want, getting better assets, getting better young players in deals, and going with whichever team is best for whichever deal is best for their franchise. So again, that's another question to consider on Milwaukee's end as well. And then again, one of the big questions I have too is Wemby, would Wemby be okay with this? Obviously, I think that fit wise on the court, it would be great. Defensively, he and Giannis, again, two really good versatile defensive players, can just dominate that end of the court. Offensively, I think they'd figure it out. We know that Giannis is more of an attack inside player, can dominates inside, and then Wemby has that versatile skill set where he's able to shoot the three, he's able to go inside, dominate with his height as well, and playmaking and things like that. And so I think they can make it work. But I also wonder, more so, is he okay with, adding another superstar so early in his career where they're not forming that big three? There's going to be, it would be him, Fox, and Giannis. And so I don't know. It wouldn't be Wemby's fault because he's just under contract. It's not really his say. He's just going into his third year. But if let's just say they dominate, they win a title or two or three, and then is there going to start getting that backlash to either Wemby or Giannis? Like Giannis took the easy way out. He went to go join a young superstar in Wemby, getting that like early LeBron Heat kind of backlash, that KD Warriors kind of situations for either he or Giannis. Again, that's something just to look at. And then also, and even though it wasn't really Wemby's fault because he's just on his rookie contract, as far as Giannis, if Giannis were to get traded, it's not really his call as much. It's more so like the organization wanted, took that chance to go get a top 3 MVP caliber player. And then also I would just say too is that does this kind of stunt Wemby's growth on the offensive end? Where, like I said, I think that he and Giannis would be awesome defensively. Offensively, like I said, I think they can make it work. It's more so like right now, Wemby has that flexibility, that freedom to kind of just figure out his game. We saw him, early on be more of an outside shooter early on the first few months of the season. Then he kind of went more to a balanced approach, and so he might lose that a little bit when it's more of like a give and take kind of offense, and then you still have Fox there. So again, I just don't know how much that was trying his offensive exploration, I guess you would say, in his creativity and his skill level over there on the offensive end. So again, those are just some of the guiding questions I did want to get into in the event that the Spurs did really, in the event that one, Giannis asked out of Milwaukee, but then two, in the event that the Spurs did start looking at some trade possibilities to get him. Now, because of where Giannis' salary is at, and like I said, if the Spurs and Bucks were to get into a trade discussions, of course, I think that Castle would definitely have to be included in a deal for Giannis. And so I just want to look at some very basic, just more so for the contract wise, what would have to work to get Giannis to San Antonio and vice versa, the Spurs players to Milwaukee. So they could do a deal before June 30th where Giannis' salary is at about $48.7 million. To do this, there's like two example deals here. The Spurs can send Castle, Devin Vassell, and Jeremy Sohan to Milwaukee for Giannis, and of course the picks. And then another example of a deal is Keldon Johnson, Harrison Barnes, and Castle for Giannis. Again, if you're in Milwaukee, you want the one that includes Castle, Vassell, and Sohan because Vassell's still on a pretty good contract, still kind of figuring out his game at the NBA level, and then Sohan is still he's about to go into the final year of his contract before he can become a restricted free agent. But maybe Milwaukee gives him more opportunity to kind of figure out his game than right now currently in San Antonio. Now, if the Spurs and Bucks, again, it's just a very big hypothetical question. It's like if they were to have negotiations go on after July 1st, so after June 30th, then Giannis's salary increases to, what did I say, $54 million. So now to get Giannis to San Antonio, you can do a deal like Devin Vassell, Keldon Johnson, or Harrison Barnes and Stephon Castle. You could do a deal like Vassell, Sohan, and Castle for Giannis, like the one I outlined earlier. And then also without Vassell included, you could do a deal like Barnes, Keldon, and Castle for Giannis. Again, Milwaukee probably wants the best players in that deal, or younger players, and so they'd probably go with the Vassell, Sohan, and Castle offer if that was the one that was if that was one of the pitches that was presented to them. So again, these are all just hypotheticals. Like I said, the key thing to watch right now as far as any kind of Giannis movement is going to be, does he ask out of Milwaukee? If word gets out that he wants out of Milwaukee, then that's where it starts getting a little interesting. And again, that's where the Spurs' name, even if there's no articles written like Spurs are interested in Giannis, that kind of stuff, it's still their name's going to be linked there just because they have the draft assets to try and go get him. They have some of the young players as well to try to make a move for him in the event that, again, he did ask out of Milwaukee. So I just wanted to explore that question as well here in this episode. All right, and then finally, the on Monday, the NBA draft lottery is officially here. Monday, May 12th, Monday evening, it will take place. So that means that we will see where the Spurs' two first round picks will end up. So, like I mentioned here on the Spotted Pod, the Spurs are going in with the 8th lottery pick odds for their own pick. And again, the most likely scenario is that pick lands 8th or 9th. Those are the two highest odds for the Spurs. But as I've talked about before, in the last 6 years, that pick going from 8th has ended up going up to 2nd when the Grizzlies got John Morant, and also 3rd when the Charlotte Hornets got LaMelo Ball. And then only once in the last 6 years has it actually gotten a little worse, where it went to 10th. So the other times it's always been 8th. So again, there's a chance that there's a stronger chance there at the 8th pick that the pick could move up. So again, the Spurs are hoping they get lucky and maybe get a top 4 pick. Then the Spurs also have the 14th pick odds via the Atlanta Hawks' first round pick. And so that one, again, 96% chance or 97% chance basically that it's going to go 14th. And history does show in the last 6 years that it has gone 14th in every lottery. So that one, I don't expect, it to move up. There's a 1% chance that it could end up going top 4. But again, very, very unlikely right now is what the chances look like. So again, most likely it's going to be that 8th pick that you're going to want to watch on Monday to see can the Spurs move into the top 4. And then also, as I mentioned before, the Spurs will have the 38th pick in the second round. So before I close this episode, don't forget to visit the spotupshot.com. I have some offseason articles up there. The first one's called Team Needs for Spurs in Offseason, where I just kind of look at the players under contract returning to the roster that are expected to be in the rotation, and two of the key needs that I've talked about before and I wrote about in that article were, of course, a big man, probably off the bench, more of a traditional 5, can help on the defensive glass, help whenever Wemby takes a break. Also, more shooting. Just I know the Spurs have a lot of versatile scorers, but they also need more shooting out there besides just Julian Champagnie and Harrison Barnes, who are more of like their outside shooters. I know they have like a number of players who can add the 3-ball or use the 3-ball, but again, just more shooting around the team for Wemby and Fox whenever they get double, and Stephon Castle whenever they see double teams next season, or players are backing off different players. I also have another article called "Who Were the Leaders in Hustle Stats for the Spurs?" So this one basically piggybacks off of when Draymond Green was named the Hustle Stat Player of the Year. I guess I don't even know what the official name was, or he won the Hustle Stat Award. Anyway, I use those same metrics that the NBA used, and I kind of applied them to Spurs players. And I was just interested to see, where do the Spurs rank there amongst themselves and on their team? Who really sticks out in like charges and contested shots and all these different hustle metrics, deflection. So it's pretty cool if you go look at that piece over on the spotupshot.com. I also wrote one called Primary Defensive Matchups for Spurs Players. So what I did here was I looked at, I used the NBA's matchup data, and I looked at the Spurs' players expected back next season and who were the top 10 matchups that they guarded most this season by that data, and what was the players' height of those matchups. And so basically you kind of see the positions and the players that Spurs players defended this past season. And then I did that because then it followed into another piece called Book Study, Spurs' Defense and Offensive Roles. And so what I did here was I've been reading this book by Dean Oliver. It's called Basketball Beyond Paper, and I really like it. And so I've been taking some of these ideas, and so I'm doing I'm going to be doing more pieces like this where I take some of Oliver's ideas and I kind of apply them just to the Spurs using some of the metrics that he's using and things like that. And so one of the cool things that he does is, instead of just saying De'Aaron Fox is a 1, right? He's a point guard, or Wemby's a 5. He's a big man. So instead of just doing those traditional 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 by positions, what Oliver writes in one of the chapters is he says, we need to start looking at defensive and offensive roles to have a better understanding of who a player is. When you're trying to add that player to the team, whether via the draft, via trade, via free agency, etc. And so there, I kind of use he has like a mathematical formula that he goes through in the book, and so I applied that to the Spurs players under contract for next season. And so you get these cool I guess positions, you would say, of both the Spurs' defensive and offensive roles based on last season, where someone like Blake Wesley, he's considered an 11. 11 means that The first one is who does he guard out on defense? He's guarding mainly perimeter players, so he's out on the perimeter. And then 1 means he's more like a passer more so than like a scorer. So that's why Wesley's like an 11. Whereas someone like Wemby is considered a 53. What does 53 mean? 5 means that defensively he's guarding more interior, more front court players. And then 3 means that he's a very versatile scorer. He can score inside, outside, get to the free throw line. So we see that Wemby's a versatile player. What it basically just to summarize it, we see that 5 players for the Spurs were very versatile scorers in Fox, Castle, Wemby, Devin Vassell, and Keldon Johnson. And then we see that 2 of their players were more like shooting players, which were Champagnie and Harrison Barnes. We see Wesley is more so your traditional point guard. And then also Jeremy Sohan's more so just an inside scorer where teams will leave him open from outside. So again, I used Dean's metrics there, and they were pretty cool just to see what that piece is like. So again, it's called Book Study, Spurs' Defensive and Offensive Roles. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode of Spot Up Pod. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a rating on your favorite podcast apps and our YouTube channel. The Spot Up Pod is recorded and produced by Paul Garcia. The music for this episode was written by Vincent Garcia and Paul Garcia. Thank you for listening and have a great day.